Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm Rod Zeeb. I'm the founder and CEO of the Heritage Institute. And today my guest is Lori Coonen, who's really the partner here and the chief learning officer and works with families. And there's all sorts of things that Lori does along with me in doing this. And what we want to talk to today about is culture and building it and what it means in a family. And the reason for that is through all the research that we've done for 30 some years now, and studies and just experience, what we've identified is the families who are successful multi-generationally create and maintain a culture in their family of communication, trust, and mentoring that's then wrapped around what their family purpose is. So we want to focus in on that culture of communication, trust, and mentoring, what that means, how it works, and all of that. So welcome, Lori.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And okay, so where does culture fit? I mean, how important is this?
From our perspective, I think culture is vital in a family that wants to stay thriving, growing, evolving for generations. I mean, it's kind of really similar to business. You have to have a great business culture, company culture, in order to have that, I guess, secret sauce ingredient to have success for years, right? Become that 100-year company, that 200-year company, that for a family business, the seventh generation company, really having that culture to allow their employees, family members, managers to thrive.
And with businesses, they could change in what they actually do.
Yeah.
I mean, like Pepsi used to just make Pepsi. That restaurants they have all the time. I mean, so what they do can change over time, but that culture is what stays the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely. Yeah. So, I mean, as you were talking, Rod, about the family purpose, the family purpose all wrapped around that. I mean, if we think about in a business, you have the mission, vision, right? And values that the either executives come up with, or maybe in some companies, it's the whole company working together to create that mission, vision, values statement directed by the founders so, really being able to translate how do these elements translate to family, the business elements translate to family. So that would be a first one I would start with.
And when we think about it, those cultures, those whatever those are in a business, they're often on the walls or on there. I mean, people see them all the time in the family, or in the business. And the same thing's true with the family. I mean, it has to be that top of mind thing as you're moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, for some companies, it's the first thing that customers see as they walk in. So it could be lip service. On the other hand, there's another part of the spectrum where businesses really take it seriously, and it becomes part of their staff meetings, part of their department meetings, part of their executive committee meetings. It's regularly revisited and really put into place. And that is, I think, what the successful culture we're talking about, that is needed in families.
Right. I mean, the handbook, I mean, everything that they do is related to that.
Yeah.
As it go along. Okay. Should we move over to, okay, so how do you do that in a family? Because it's a little different than a business. Okay. Yeah. in a family, you're not, even in a business, so however you want to relate this, it's not going to happen overnight, right? You're not going to have a weekend meeting and boom, we've got culture. I mean, this takes time. The target you may come up with in a meeting or something, but the culture is going to take time.
And intentionality, I think, right? And it starts from the top, right? It has to be a focus for the person in charge or the team in charge. It can't just be well, you make it happen. It needs to be that intentional focus for the whole company.
And it can't, like you said, it can't just be lip service. It's got to be action.
Right.
I mean, you've got to live it in order for, and it's same business and families. It's the same both ways. And a lot of times we hear from families and in family businesses and stuff. We have to have family governance. Mm-hmm. Does family governance create culture?
Poof, it does.
Yeah, right. It's
And no, I mean, the answer would be no, it does not create culture. It creates guidelines. But the important part of that is, what guidelines do you put in play? And
right.
it's really family driven. Like, what worked? What made it work? Like, every family is unique, and that governance is going to be unique. There might be elements and specific things that all governance has, but it's what works for the family.
Which is again analogous to a business.
Right.
I mean, businesses have mission, vision statements, and all that, but they're all different, and
And
they have
business plans.
different plans are different. How they communicate, those are all different, and that's one of the things that's always interesting is because you can get a template and say, okay, this is my family's governance.
Right.
No, it's a family's governance, not your family's governance, because like you said, family governance is going to be built off of what works for the family. And so it's built off their experiences and what really worked for them. And in a lot of ways, there's some families I've talked to, and the first thing they want to do is governance because they've heard about it. And you kind of go, okay, let's do some things and figure out what works for your family. And then basically you're going to codify that. You're going to take that and create, okay, this is our family's governance. This is how we make decisions together. This is how we resolve conflicts together. This is how we bring new people in. And they're analogous to those business. Same thing with businesses. They don't just bring in somebody and say, okay, your job description is X. There's your office. Go to work. There's hopefully a little training, no
And
matter what they're doing.
mentoring, right?
Mentoring, right?
Yeah. And putting it into action. Like you had mentioned, Rod, yes, you can have family governance, create it, but you have to put it into action. Apply the knowledge, apply the guidelines, and model it for those that are just coming in, because they don't know what they don't know. And if they don't know where to begin, they'll create their own path. And, they could be seen as a disruption because they're not doing it the family's way. Well, if they weren't taught, they weren't mentored, they had no clue of this family governance, they didn't know what they didn't know.
Yeah,
So it
and
might
this is
not be intentional.
right. Yeah, yeah. And they're not just trying to be, ornery. They're just trying to make it happen because that's what they've been told, to make it happen. And that's really, as you look at this, that's why those words are so important: culture of communication, trust, and mentoring. Because over time, if you can't communicate well together, it's just not going to happen. And there are the studies that showed that when families who blew up, what is it, 60% of the time it was lack of communication and trust. 25% of the time it was lack of lack of mentoring from one generation to the next. And what is it, 10% of the time it was lack of common vision. It was lack of that. That's the purpose. What are we doing this for? And I'm guessing that if you did a survey of businesses, it would be pretty much the same thing. As you look at how it works. And that is one thing that people have asked me, how different is it when you're working with a family that has a business and when you're working with a family that doesn't have a business? Well, the culture, I mean, they still have, both of them have that culture of communication, trust, and mentoring. It's just you have a business, you have another layer that goes with it. But it doesn't change that we want to be able to communicate well together. We want to trust each other, and we want to mentor from one generation to the next generation so that continues in the family. And it's just kind of who you are over time. Okay, so now when we talk about culture of communication, trust, and mentoring, communication has changed over the last, during my lifetime and your lifetime and, even my grandkids' lifetime. That how it's done changes, but the culture of having good communication doesn't. So can we unpack that a little bit? Because, um, just look at all that's happened in the last 20 years. There wasn't an iPhone 20 years ago. And even those iPhones didn't have cameras, right? I mean, so, things, just look at the changes happened in how we communicate. So there's a difference between how we communicate and having a culture that we're going to be good at communication in our family.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
right?
That brings up a great point. Like, effective communication. I mean, we want that, right, in the family. But what's effective? So, I mean, one of the things that over the last 2 years has been kind of a passion for me is just thinking and looking through the different generations and how
Mhm.
it's changed. So, I mean, if you look at the traditionalist, the silent generation, their communication was face to face or a formal letter. I mean, that was the way they were effectively communicating. And in a business, it was more top down, or even in the family, it was a hierarchy, like top makes the decisions. As you go down, you just follow those
Right.
decisions.
And tells everybody what that decision is.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, if you jump to like Generation X, which that's where I am, you know, our communication style is more, they call it hub spoke, but it's one person communicating to everybody. It's not, and it's like equal playing
So
ground.
it's
It's
yeah,
not
more of a
top down.
circular than top down. Okay. Okay.
Right. And, you know, we're communicating by emails, by text, and, you know, that's formal enough for it to be effective. But if you jump forward to Generation Z, which is now my daughter, they their communication is highly connected, like so instantaneously. I think my word for Generation Z is instantaneous or instant, because they need instant gratification. They want instant response, instant feedback on demand when they want it. It isn't top down. It's we're all on the same
Plain.
plane.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, thinking about that in a family, you're going to have three, maybe four generations as part of the family assembly or family council, as you call it, and really working through how are we going to effectively communicate by taking in everybody's communication preferences, which is super difficult because there's going to be compromise,
Oh,
guaranteed.
yeah. Well, and you just think about, I mean, the first generation, go back to when I first started doing this, okay? The first generation, they would hold a meeting and they would tell everybody what they needed to have. Okay. Worked fine for the boomers and and next generation down pretty well. Okay. But now, same kind of thing. You still need to train that thing. It may be done by a series of on-demand videos instead of a meeting that we're going to bring everybody into so that they can get it when they want it, how they want it, be able to look over it again. So it isn't that the culture of good communication changes. It's how the communication is happening changes over time.
Right.
Um,
And as you described, the mentoring. I mean,
right.
mentoring was in one meeting. Now Gen Z likes it on demand videos when they want it so that they can learn how they want it versus having to be in a meeting at that particular time.
And
Now, I mean, throwing that out there, which one's most effective?
I was just going to say, I mean, think about it. If you got told something with no context and you weren't really practicing it or anything else, that was the mentoring. That's what the mentoring was. You were told this is how you do it, as opposed to having the videos that when you're actually dealing with the issue, you can go back and look at the video. you know, uh, I'm thinking that that's probably a whole lot more effective. A few years ago, we were at a wedding and they had taken the 8 millimeter movie things that they had and they turned it into a CD. And the groom goes, when my kids are having their weddings, it's going to be a little cube that you put in the middle of the thing, and there'll be, the hologram will come up and do. I mean, it's that part is changing constantly, and and more rapidly. But the concept of mentoring from one generation to the next generation, and the concept of making it so that we want to be a family that communicates well, we we know where we're going, and we do it together, that doesn't change.
Right. It's the how, the
Right.
when, the where, those things change.
And the tools.
The
That's a how, I
tools.
guess that's a
There
how.
you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because the mentoring, you know, we talk about this a lot when we're working with families, but also training is it's not just top down mentoring. It's horizontal, it's diagonal, and it's even bottom up
Right.
mentoring.
That's one of the fun things in families right now. I mean, we've always talked about in families, There's a lot of times that, like my brother and I, we figured out early on that if I wanted something my kids really would understand, I'd had him tell him rather than me, because they would listen to they'd listen to Uncle Rick before they listened to me, and same, and going back and forth. So there's that part of it. So the horizontal was, as opposed to the vertical or something. Um, but now it's like all over, and it's amazing how that works because you have that culture of trust. I mean, that's why we have all those things: communication, trust, and mentoring. You have that trust in the family. It can go, and like I say, there's a lot of things. One of the things we have is, okay, so what can the grandkids teach the grandparents? A lot of it ends up being technology.
Right.
But, because that's the thing. But when you think about that and what that does in building trust in the family, when the grandson, granddaughter feels like I can do something here that's going to help the whole family and help grandma and grandpa, that's a good thing. So it isn't all top down. It's not even horizontal. It's all directions that it can go.
Now, what happens if the culture gets off track? If you feel like there isn't the effective communication happening, there's not the trust in the family. Like, what would you recommend, Rod?
Well, and usually that is when somebody doesn't feel heard. A lot of times that's where it comes from is people don't feel like they're being heard or being listened to or taken seriously. So a lot of that is whoever is the family coach, if there's a family coach, or having somebody come in and help them to identify how would it work best for everybody, not just for whoever it is that's trying to be mentored or the person that's mentoring. How does it work best for everybody? And having that flexibility, understanding that what works between you and I may not work between you and somebody else in our company or me and somebody else in the company. So knowing that and having that flexibility of saying, okay, what works? This goes back to breaking the rules, with Kurt Wright. What works? What makes it work? If we can identify those things, then we can make it work for everybody. But we got to be flexible. You've got to be open to it's not my way or the highway. That top down thing that was going on for, that's what I grew up with. They told you what to do and you didn't ask questions. You just did it, whether it was working or not. What do you think?
So, yeah, I mean, reflecting back on, what happened, where did we go wrong, or was there a bump in the road? Reflecting back on, was there the sharing of the family governance? Was there the sharing of the expectations or the guidelines? Is it intentional? I mean, they might not know what they don't know. And just really reflecting back on that. And then, like you said, figuring out what will work for everybody going forward now that everyone is in the know.
And part of that is going back to assuming good intent. I mean, because disappointment, one of the definitions we use is disappointment is the difference between your expectations and your experience. Well, if there's expectations that either side has that the other side doesn't know about, you can have disappointment even if everybody's doing the right thing, but I had a different expectation and it didn't happen. I'm disappointed. And so that goes back to why it starts with a culture of communication. Open communication, being willing to talk about things, being willing to listen. That open communication and that's why it's 60% of the time that the families blew up. That was why. And then being flexible on how that communication is going to happen, because good communication doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be driven by one person. The best communication to get it to somebody and for them to receive it, and that again is going to take some compromise.
And then I think you hit on a good point as far as the trust element. Assuming good intent is, in my mind, trusting that everyone is putting their best foot forward.
Yeah, they're not trying to hurt you. They're not trying to make you look bad, but sometimes there's disagreements. That's life. I mean, there's people who are going to look at the same thing and see different things. But that's, yeah, having that trust that we're in this together and we're in it to be a healthy family going along. And healthy doesn't mean the Stepford family. That's another thing that we get into a lot is who gets to decide, who we are. And do we get to dictate that this is who our family is? And, in reality, we are the family. I mean, and it's a matter of being able to identify and have that open communication and listen to each other, because you don't get good harmony if everyone's singing the same note. And that's really what families are looking for when they talk about unity. They're not looking necessarily for unity, they're looking for harmony, that we're all pointing in the same direction. We may be going about it different ways, but we're pointed in the same direction.
Absolutely.
So when you think about creating culture, I mean, it sounds great. We're going to create a culture. There's some elements that, that takes time. You don't create a culture in a meeting or a weekend, or even, there's some families we get together, every year. Even that doesn't create culture unless it's aimed. You've got to have a target for this. It's got to be intentional. So it takes time. It's unique to every family, just like in businesses. They may have the same basic things, but they're going to be unique for every family. And really, it's created by actions. It's created by what we actually do, not what we say. And the more we work together, the more we do things, work and play and celebrate together, all of those things help build that culture. We talked a little bit about family governance. Family governance is a great way of codifying it. I mean, basically having it written down. But one of the things about family governance is that you revisit it regularly, because it's going to change as communication styles change and communication abilities change and all that sort of stuff. But you do need to look at what worked, what made it work, and what can be ideal. So, so that culture doesn't change, but what happens underneath that culture may change, but the culture doesn't change.
Yeah. And if you're a family listening to this, or an advisor that has a family that you think, might want to, get some of this stuff in place, I think I live in Wisconsin. So one example that always comes to mind is like a vacation home or a lake house. How do you create, if you will, family governance around the vacation home? Start thinking about the expectations, the guidelines for using the home, how it is opened and closed if it does close after the summer months. Think about the reservation policy, if you will. Who's going to use it? When can you use it? That kind of stuff. So really taking that small step around one focused item could be a great first step for a family, or, if you're guiding a family as an advisor, just really helping them to think through how those decisions are going to be made. Think through, what's reasonable. Think through how to communicate about it. And really, you're going to test it out. You're not going to all come up with, these are the guidelines and it works immediately. You're going to put guidelines in place and you're going to go, oh, that probably wasn't the best decision. Let's modify it.
Yeah, vacation homes, I always get the question of, okay, what is the definition of clean when you leave? Because there's a completely different, people may have completely different ideas of what clean means. And so, one of the compromises I've seen in families is we're going to hire somebody to come clean it every time, and we're just going to pay for it, because when you leave, I want to make sure I come in after Lori, not after Rod, because that's what's going to happen here. And it doesn't have to be even the vacation home. Just things like if you take a vacation together, or you do anything you're doing together can be that target for you to practice with and learn with. Okay, so now you've heard all of this that Lauren and I have been talking about, and if you're a professional that works with families, pretty much no matter what discipline you are, there's really, if you're working with the families, they're going to want to look at some of this stuff, and if they want to be successful multi-generationally, they're going to want to do some of this stuff. And you get your choice of where you're going to play in the sandbox here. It goes anywhere from, you can just introduce the concept and turn it over to somebody else to do it. You can do part of it. You can collaborate with somebody else so that you're part of it and always in front of the family and stuff. Or you can get trained and you can just do it all yourself. And that's entirely up to you. And you may go, you may start with, I just want to have somebody else do it. No, I want to be trained and I want to do it all myself. Now I want to take some vacation, so I'm going to collaborate. I mean, you can be anywhere on that continuum, and you can jump back and forth depending on who the client is. So understand this isn't something you necessarily have to do all yourself. In fact, you're probably not going to do it all yourself. There's going to be some collaboration no matter what. But the question is, are you going to lead it all? Or are you going to turn it over to somebody else? Or are you going to collaborate? And all of that can be done through training. Just pick where you want to be and what kind of training that you want.
There's different levels that you can jump in on. One of the first foundational trainings that we always recommend, though, is better listening, better questions, better relationships. That gives you a great foundation, things that you can implement immediately, and also get a whole spectrum of what the heritage process is all about.
And that training isn't for you just because if you want to do this kind of work. That training is for if you want to understand what your client really wants and be able to figure out what it is and give it to them and help them find it, whether it's collaboration or not, that's what that's for. Everybody's got a decision-making process and most of us don't know what it is. And so asking the right questions and then asking the right follow-up questions and being able to help them really identify what they want is amazing as you build the relationship with the client. Because a lot of us, especially in the financial services or the attorney world, the estate planning world, we get focused on the money, how much. And the how much is not really what's driving them typically. I mean, that's a piece, but it's not that piece. And typically money is not their desired outcome. What the money gives them is their desired outcome, peace of mind, ability to take vacations, whatever, that's what they're looking for. And so if you stop with the money, you're probably not hitting what they really want. Great training for all of that. Use the stuff that you get there. We have to laugh about it because you use it with your family, you'll use it with your office, you'll use it with, when your kids are going to college. What can I expect from you? What can you expect from me is kind of important stuff. So look forward to that. Look at our website and there's all the different kinds of training on there. You can choose from there. And as always, if you have any questions on any of this stuff, send us an email and we can set up a time to either talk or give you the responses that you need by email. Thank you very much.
It's been great being here. Thanks, Rod.